In 1983, the best car in America was French. 8 years later, that brand was gone from every single American showroom. Ask anyone why, and you'll get the exact same answer everyone gives. But that answer is wrong. January 1983, Motor Trend, America's most respected car magazine, sat down to pick the car of the year. The winner wasn't the Ford, wasn't the Chevy, wasn't the Chrysler. It was the Renault Alliance, built on American soil with a French heart. 5 years later, 1988, the Peugeot 405 wins European Car of the Year by the biggest margin in the award's history. American car magazines called it the best Peugeot ever built. Both brands walked into America in the 80s with the same swagger. Both brands were dead and gone by 1991. Ask why, and the easy answer is terrible quality. But that's only half the story. Nobody tells you the other half. Hey, this is Untold Drive. If stories about your cars and motorcycles history forgot are your thing, hit subscribe. To understand why France lost the American market, you first got to understand why they walked in. Back in the 1950s, France was the world's third largest car producer. Renault, Peugeot, Citroën, 3 brands, and together they owned massive chunks of the map. Europe, theirs. Africa, theirs. South America, theirs. One market was still out of reach: America, the biggest car market on the planet, at the peak of its powers, moving over 7 million vehicles a year. The French did the math.
Wait for it. Here it comes.
Grab just 5% of that, and you'd be bigger than half your European rivals put together. But America had one thing no other market on earth had. America wasn't just a market. America was a maze. 3 French brands walked into that maze. 3 completely different strategies. All 3 ended exactly the same way. Let's start with the first one in Citroën. Citroën got to America first, back in the 50s, and it came in swinging with the Citroën DS. A car that was, no exaggeration, 20 years ahead of its time. Hydropneumatic suspension that could raise and lower the whole car at the flip of a lever. A spaceship-shaped body American drivers had genuinely never seen before. Headlights that swiveled with the steering wheel. In Europe, it was a masterpiece. In America, federal regulators wouldn't allow half of it. Citroën had to rip out the swiveling headlights, the exact feature that made the DS, and bolt on ordinary sealed beams instead. What landed in American showrooms wasn't really a DS anymore. It was a DS in a costume. Then, in 1972, something wild happened. For the first time in history, Motor Trend's Car of the Year went to an import, the Citroën SM. But right as the trophy came out, the ground underneath was already shifting. 1973, the oil crisis hits. Gas lines wrap around city blocks. Americans who'd spent 2 decades driving big V8s suddenly wanted something small and thrifty. The French were thrilled. This, they figured, was their moment. Except America wasn't just craving small cars, it was also writing the strictest crash safety code on the planet. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 215 became law. Every car sold in America now had to have bumpers locked at one fixed height, no exceptions. For a car whose entire identity was built on a suspension system that raised and lowered on command, that regulation was a death sentence. Meeting that standard would have cost Citroën millions, for a market where it was barely moving units to begin with. In 1974, Citroën pulled out of America for good, the first Frenchman to leave, but definitely not the last. Renault figured it had learned from Citroën's mistake. It's right on the problem. Cars engineered for European roads, then shipped over and sold as is, were never going to work in America. So the fix seemed obvious. Stop exporting, start building right here on American soil. 1979. Renault placed the biggest bet in its history. It found a partner, American Motors Corporation, AMC, the smallest of Detroit's Big Four. Renault took a controlling stake in AMC, eventually growing to 46%, and poured $150 million into rebuilding the aging Kenosha, Wisconsin plant from the ground up just to build a French car on American soil. $150 million in 1979 money just to renovate one factory. This wasn't an export deal anymore. This was a full-scale invasion. The car, the Renault Alliance, an Americanized version of the Renault 9 with over 70% US-made parts assembled by American auto workers but running on French DNA. It hit 37 miles per gallon in city driving, right as gas prices made that number matter more than almost anything else on the window sticker. 4 years later, January 1983, Motor Trend announced the news that had Renault engineers celebrating from Kenosha to Paris. Everyone thought this was the start of an empire. The headline, "The Renault Alliance is Motor Trend's Car of the Year." Hold on. At the exact moment Renault was popping champagne, on the other side of the Pacific, its real competition was making a move it hadn't even clocked yet. Back during the 1973 oil crisis, almost everyone assumed this was Europe's golden hour in America. Small, fuel-sipping European cars, finally their moment. Wrong, it was Japan's golden hour. Toyota, Honda, Datsun, three brands that had entered America in the 1960s selling cars most people considered small, cheap, and a little bit of a joke. But between 1973 and 1983, they built something the French never bothered to, a real dealership network. By the early 1980s, Toyota alone had over 1,200 dealerships spread across the country. That meant if your car broke down in the middle of Nevada, there was still a Toyota dealer within reach. Renault, at its absolute peak, had fewer than 500. Japanese dealers were in every town, French dealers were only in the big cities. But it wasn't just a numbers game. Here's the real difference. France built cars for Europe, then tried to sell America the leftovers. Japan started from a completely different question. What does the American driver actually want? American buyers wanted automatic transmissions, something French engineers were painfully slow to figure out. Meanwhile, Consumer Reports and every major buying guide kept saying the same thing. Japanese cars were the most reliable on the market. French cars were sitting right near the very bottom. Back to Renault. 1985. Bad news. Oil prices collapsed. Americans went right back to buying big cars. The small fuel-efficient segment that Renault and Peugeot had bet their entire American strategy on just shrunk overnight. And in that smaller pie, the dominant player wasn't France anymore. It was Japan, armed with a massive dealer network and factories already running on American soil. Renault was losing this fight. And worse, it was about to wound itself. The car that had just been named America's Car of the Year had a massive problem. The Alliance earned that 1983 trophy on real merit, genuinely solid build quality at launch. But somewhere along the line, quality control completely fell apart. Within a couple of years, the Alliance was showing up on lists of the least reliable cars in America. When a car wins Car of the Year, buyers expect that same quality a few years down the road. Watching a Car of the Year quietly fall apart isn't just bad press, it's the kind of brand damage you don't recover from. Renault's sales plummeted. The company was bleeding millions. Then came the devastating blow. November 1986. George Bessy, the visionary Renault chairman who'd bet the company's future on America, was shot and killed outside his Paris apartment by Action Direct, a far-left militant group that saw him as a symbol of corporate France. 4 months later, in March 1987, with Renault still reeling from the tragedy and France's economy in trouble, the board made its final call. Sell the AMC stake to Chrysler and get out from under the weight before it sank the whole enterprise. Chrysler didn't buy AMC for the Alliance. Chrysler bought AMC for one thing, Jeep. June 1987. The last Renault Alliance rolled off the Kenosha assembly line, and that was it. Renault left America. No press conference, no farewell tour, it just stopped. One French brand was still standing, Peugeot. It had been in America since 1958, quieter than Renault, more conservative, never willing to swing for the fences the way Renault had. When Renault packed up in 1987, Peugeot became the last Frenchman left in America. And in 1988, it played its absolute best card, the Peugeot 405, the very same car that had just won European Car of the Year by the biggest margin in the awards history. American car magazines called it the best Peugeot ever built. Peugeot genuinely believed this time would be different, but in the American market, Peugeot's real competition wasn't Renault anymore. It was Honda. In 1990, the Honda Accord alone sold over 417,000 cars in America. That's over 1,100 cars a day, every single day. Peugeot, that same year, with its entire model lineup combined, sold 4,261 cars in the whole country. That's basically nothing. Honda was outselling Peugeot's entire year every 4 days. This wasn't competition anymore. This was a tank rolling straight over a bicycle. And then, in 1989, Lexus and Infiniti showed up. The luxury segment Peugeot had hoped to inch into overnight became unrecognizable. Lexus dropped the LS400 on the market, a car engineered to match BMW and Mercedes on every front except one: price. It launched at $35,000, tens of thousands of dollars under a comparable German flagship. A buyer who might once have stretched for a Peugeot 405 could now get a Lexus instead, for less money and way more prestige. August 6, 1991. A letter landed at 151 Peugeot dealerships across the United States. Peugeot Motors of America had made its decision. It was done building cars for the American market. No public farewell, no commemorative send-off model, not even a press conference. After 33 years, the last Frenchman standing had left the building too. So, was quality the main reason France lost the American market? Yes, but that's not the whole story. Was culture the difference? Sure, but Japan's culture was every bit as different from America's, and Japan won anyway. There were 4 invisible walls French automakers never managed to get over. Wall 1, dealership math. Toyota had 1,200 dealers because it spent decades and real money building that network out. Peugeot had 151. That network never made economic sense to invest in, not enough scale to justify the advertising, the training, the infrastructure. Without investment, service quality stays low, sales stay low, and the whole thing feeds itself in a loop that never breaks. Wall 2, liability law. In America, one lawsuit over a mechanical defect could cost a company a fine equal to years of profit. For a giant automaker moving millions of cars, that's a manageable risk. For Peugeot, selling barely 4,000 cars a year, one bad court ruling could have wiped out its entire American sales division overnight. Wall 3, the currency trap. Toyota never had a currency problem, because by the early 80s it was already building cars on American soil, costs in dollars, revenue in dollars. Peugeot's costs were entirely in French francs, while its revenue came in dollars. Every swing in the exchange rate either ate its profit margin or forced a price hike. A permanent risk that never got solved. Wall 4, the size trap. Here's a strategic mistake at the core of all of it. American and Japanese automakers learned how to build cars that were big and efficient. The French only ever knew how to build small. So when gas got cheap again in the mid-80s, American buyers went right back to big cars, and France had nothing on the shelf to sell them. Can France come back? In 2017, PSA, the parent company of Peugeot and Citroën, announced it was exploring a return to America. On paper, proof the French had actually studied their own mistakes. The plan? Skip the billion-dollar dealership build-out entirely. Gather real data on American driving habits first, and sell online instead. But before a single new Peugeot ever reached an American driveway, PSA merged with Fiat Chrysler in 2021 to form Stellantis. Overnight, the new company already had Jeep, Ram, and Dodge sitting in its American portfolio. There was no longer any reason to gamble millions reviving Peugeot or Citroën stateside. So here's where it lands. France took Europe, France took Africa, France took South America, took Oceania. America gave French cars exactly one Car of the Year trophy and nothing else. What do you think? If Peugeot came back today with an all-electric lineup, would you buy one over a Tesla or a Hyundai? Or is the French brand image dead in America forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to know how a former fridge manufacturer secretly bought Volvo and took over European luxury, hit subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you in the next one.